Vanessa, before we start, I just wanted to thank you for doing this.
Oh,
Kind of had this on the shelf for a while. I used it, then fallen off. So it's just the right timing for me to get back to it.
yeah. And then this is the time to do it. I actually, part of my impetus of doing this were two things. Here in Michigan, we have so many. We have 3 variants going on in my area of the state. And so the cases are just absolutely crazy high. And I spend a lot of my time this week actually supporting people, as I have been through all of COVID, right? And so I thought this people need to know. And a lot of times I talked to people that were like, they actually were consulting me about other issues. And I'm like, oh, and by the way, I have COVID too. And I'm like, are you using this for COVID? Because we've had like over 100 cases now that have reported back. And so we have enough, we have enough ends, so to speak, to really be able to get some information out there to people. And I apologize for that. I have to add everybody in, because I know that I had in the settings that people could join at any time, and that it was muted. So I don't know why it actually did that, but we just go with it, right? So let me see here, waiting room. So I'll just kind of do that, because I'm happy to do that. I hope that everybody realizes, what a tool they have with their microsport units, and that, yes, our wheelhouse is pain and healing things, but at the same time, there's so much that you can do to help support. And we had just a really heartbreaking situation where we lost a client at my practice this week, and he's my age, so he's in his early 50s, and it was really quite heartbreaking, honestly. And you kind of, in the back of your mind, you're always thinking, if he had just one more tool, right? If he'd had just one more thing to be able to have in his toolbox, could that have been the one thing? So many people, are kind of getting through it with practically zero symptoms. Some people walking around saying they're walking around with hardly anything, and not even realizing they have COVID per se. But then other people are obviously moderately ill to severely ill. And just so that you guys know, I did go through it. I had COVID last spring. So some of what I'll share are my own personal experiences. And I think the illness programs and the illness support are one of the less understood programs on the microsports. But let's jump into some of that stuff for you guys. What I'm going to do is really just kind of add as a reminder, every unit that is a Howe RT has some illness support in it. And it's, people are saying, like, why is that? And I'm like, well, because, true story, sometimes you have bronchitis on the morning of the Super Bowl, right? Or you'll have a female Olympian who has cramps on the day of a big competition. So there's so much that we can do to help in these situations. And again, we always have to say, it's not it's not going to be the end all be all. It's not going to be it's not our full treatment protocol, right? And we'll get into some of what we can do. And also I'll leave this really open for people. If you have comments, once everybody kind of gets in here, when you have comments, just kind of raise your hand or send a message in the text box, and we'll try to actually kind of unmute you and get some comments. I am trying to keep this to an hour, just so that it's more usable. I think we could probably talk all day about this topic, and that's not my intention, but I want to be able to also have it so that people can really have this as a resource down the road. So my plan is to put this onto our Howe RT YouTube channel. We do actually have a YouTube channel. I think the only thing that actually lives on there right now is the Getting Started video, but it will also be available on there. And I'm going to try to actually, I don't usually do this part, but I'm going to try to get that out today and on there, because I know there's a lot of people, A, that have interest, B, that are actually sick and need this information right now. So, okay, so that jumped into it. You guys all know who I am. I'm Vanessa. And I'm not sure why that's doing that. Okay, so as a reminder, all units, whether you have a pro rehab or a home unit, they all have something to help with illnesses. So even the pro rehabs, which are much less wellness oriented, they on wellness 3, wellness 2, wellness 8. Wellness 3 is cold virus chest, and we'll talk about that one a lot more because that seems to be the one that's helpful for COVID. But also it has stomach parasite virus and then virus. And I'm going to go through a brief overview of what all of the programs are that are on the standards. And so we'll actually kind of go into more depth on that. So on the programs, it is right here in the wellness section. Hopefully you guys can see my pointer, but so well 2, stomach parasite virus, well 3, cold virus chest, and well 8, virus. And so I'll make sure I got everybody in. Okay, so illness support on the home units obviously is much more extensive. So there's 12 programs that are for illness. And so in 2022, I don't know if you guys saw in the emails, but for the first time since we launched the original programs, we will be slightly modifying the standard programs, mostly because we felt like it was so valuable to add the skin allergy and body histamine, and I'll go into that when I go into more depth. And so on the 2022 versions, skin allergy and body histamine is added as an illness 3 program, which seemed to make sense because it was right after lung asthma. And so if you look at the actual, let's do that. Sometimes it does this on. So on the home units, an entire section. This is the pre-2022, and so this is the standard programs that people can see. And so we'll talk about each of those in depth here. So going through those off of the home unit, immune support, a few words on that. So obviously immune support is to help to boost the immune system. If I'm really honest about what we have going on right now, I feel like immune support is not as helpful as some of the more direct programs like influenza for influenza, which we have a lot of influenza A going on right now in this area. So it's just a hotbed for different things. So immune support is also a caveat of that is that you really want to be careful using immune support with somebody who has an autoimmune disorder. So if you have an autoimmune disorder, your immune system is already overactivated, and so use that really with care and caution. And I would say just pull it out if you need to when the other programs just feel like they're not cutting it. For me personally, I can tell you when I went through COVID, I had mild to moderate, I would say probably moderate symptoms for a good 8 to 9 days. It was probably Delta. I had it last spring. And so immune support, I ran one time and that was it. What really helped me through was more the cold virus chest. So that's kind of what I want to say on immune support. Stomach parasite virus, when to use that. If I could have gotten away with calling this everything that makes you nauseous or puke, then that would be the name of the program, because that's really what it is if you ate something, if you have food poisoning, if you have just that kind of community virus pukey bug that's going around through the schools, I too is for that. The history behind that is I originally wrote the program for a client that I had that came back from Mexico with Montezuma's Revenge, and that's how we actually originally started the earliest version program. So the next one is Candida fungus. This is just a basic frequency, our combination of frequencies for the Candida frequency, and then also some general fungus types of programs. Not as much of a player in these types of bugs that are going around the community right now, unless you have a long history of sinus issues. And then that bug is you're probably living and residing there for a longer term. And we'll talk about that when we talk about sinus components. Cold virus chest, I4, is the go-to. I always say this is the first one right now. It does have frequencies that target corona-based viruses. When we started going into the beginning of this pandemic, I said a little prayer and I was like, dear God, please let there be something standard on the programs that is already out there that people can use and be helpful. But I knew in my left-sided brain that it was probably going to be cold virus chest, because this program was originally written for chronic. I originally wrote it for my daughter with her chronic bronchitis issue. And so it does have frequencies in there that help with chronic bronchitis, but also pharyngitis, or what we call it, like the throat component. So it was meant to be more comprehensive than just a bronchitis type of program. And so it seems to be the go-to, and we'll talk about the specifics behind that in a bit. So the next one's I-5 is for fever, and this literally is just to bring down a high fever. It's a short program. It's I say, like, see, I don't have the times memorized as well. It's 17 minutes, and so with that, I just add that fever is your body's attempt to increase the core temperature to try to kill off whatever bugs it is. So this really is only meant to be used, and as I don't want to say as a rescue, but really when the fever becomes too high, too severe, right? So when I actually had COVID, my max of my fever was about 100. I never used fever during the time I had COVID. That said, when I got my second vaccine, my temp started going up over 102, which is really ironic, much higher than when I had actual COVID. And so that's when I pulled it out, because 102 is just too high for someone who normally runs 97.4. So yeah, so that's when you kind of use that. Influenza fever is one that it's getting a lot of use right now. Because in this area, as I know, a lot of places in the country, influenza is an issue, and that's part of why we're seeing so many people so sick. So influenza history behind that, I wrote that program for myself when I was scheduled to teach in Hawaii, and one of my clients was so kind to give me H1N1 5 days before I was scheduled to go and teach in Hawaii. So I was highly motivated to get myself better quickly. And so hence the influenza fever program became. Fever was added into it just because it was it seems to kind of flow in the programming. And so it just kind of morphed into influenza fever. It goes nicely together. Influenza fever is often the one I tell people, I call it the big gun. So when I wrote that program, I realized that a lot of the problems that we see with like an influenza is that whatever bugs tend to be living in your, in your respiratory system that are your things, whether that's strep or whether that's a candida or whether that's a pneumonia that you've had in the past, those bugs that are living there are just waiting for an opportunity to rear their ugly heads again, right? And so that's really one of the problems with influenza, is that it compromises the respiratory system in such a way that whatever bug is your nemesis, it has the opportunity to come in back and become active. So that's why a lot of times you'll see a resurgence of something like a pneumonia or a bronchitis after you've had influenza. And the programs and the frequencies that target those kinds of things are built into influenza. So that's why I call it the big gun, because many times that it helps clear some of those other things and helps keep them from becoming a bigger problem. Virus is the general shingles virus, but it's an Epstein-Barr, mononucleosis, shingles, chickenpox. There's a fair amount of instructions, I believe, in the manual on that one. It's not the one that you're going to utilize for the bugs that are going around now, because it's more of that herpetic family, as opposed to right now we're dealing with all the respiratory types of things. So the respiratory tend to be more in that influenza fever and the cold virus chest. Infection full body, what that program is, I guess the history probably tells more. It was developed as a support for people with Lyme and co-infections, mostly the co-infection side. And what ended up happening is that we found in our clinical practice that it was incredibly helpful for just when you just didn't know what was going on. So we've seen it be helpful for things like wounds, where you weren't sure what infectious component had gotten in there. It does help support the folks with the co-infections and Lyme disease. And so again, probably not one of the things you're going to do for the respiratory bugs that are around. So to round out the final home ones, the cellulitis, it was originally written for cellulitis. We found that also people report that it softens the appearance of cellulite. That wasn't originally the intention, but hey, it's a bonus, right? And so cellulitis also can be really helpful for other types of skin infections, wounds that don't want to heal, that don't seem to respond. It targets tissues, both the skin, but also that cellulite fat layer underneath. And so it does seem to help things that are deeper and infected. If it's really more superficial, and I know this sounds kind of weird, but the acne program, acne is actually a staph infection that has infected the outer layers of the skin. I usually direct people to use the acne if it's something more superficial. Pneumonia is one that we might use right now. It is obviously it's for when people have that pneumonia secondary kind of component. It's probably a minority of folks that I see that actually have to use it, but it's nice to have that in your arsenal. Right. Lung asthma. I'm actually glad that Dr. Andy came on because I think this actually came out of her group out in the Wyoming and Utah area, and this has been helpful as well in the recovery components of COVID specifically. So we'll talk about that in a bit. And then for those people, there's only a handful of you guys that you've gotten your unit since the beginning of 2022, since it's only the 15th. But that I-13 will now be skin allergy and body histamine. A lot of you guys who've had the units longer have had that added on because we found it to be so helpful. What that is, originally I had a program that was for skin allergy, rashes, poison ivy, anything that kind of made your skin angry, right? And I was trying to develop a program that would help with food sensitivity reactions. And when we put them together, it was kind of some sort of synergistic magic, and they tended to work for both and better than they did by themselves. And so that's actually been impactful enough that we were like, wow, we need to add this in as a standard program. It'll go in at I-13, which kind of makes sense because it follows with lung asthma, which always has that kind of allergy component. So let's dive deeper into our community issues right now and what people are utilizing the devices for. I'm going to talk about influenza first because it's a little easier and a less meaty topic. Because for influenza, you run influenza, right? And so this is a good one to run if you have a long history of influenza, if you're one of those people that always gets the flu. I can tell you I've really only had it maybe twice in my life. So I don't fall into that category, but it's a good one to try because like I said, it is that big shotgun, right? So it's going to target, it does have numbers for strep that are in there as well, just because a lot of times that's one of those opportunistic bugs that goes through there. And it does have fever built into influenza, but that might be one that you want to do just to keep it into a manageable range. Keep in mind that you want to have the fever burning off the bug, right? Others to consider, and when I developed the sinus infection programs that are in the wellness section. What is it? It is Well 6, because I had a long history of sinus issues. I've had 2 sinus surgeries. It used to be that if I literally dusted my own home, I would end up with a sinus infection. So it was just kind of my weak point, right? And so if you are like that, if you have that kind of sinus history, then adding in sinus infection, also you have, if you haven't used your unit to kind of really tamp down your sinus allergies, it's a good time to focus on that. And so I would say that's kind of silly if you're walking around with sinus allergies and you have a MicroSport home unit. Typically 3 times, run it 3 times over a couple days, I would say, keep it within a week. And most clients report back that their symptoms, they're able to reduce or eliminate their medications, usually eliminate their medications for their allergies and are pretty much symptom free anywhere from 3 to 5 years. So I hit about the 7-year mark, and then I'm like, oh, Vanessa, you got to remind yourself to run it a few times. I run it one time and it's usually good for another 3. And then I'm like, oh, I gotta really focus on it. So it's not a long-term solution, but that's long enough term for me to be happy with that. Keep in mind, if you have those kinds of sinus issues, that if you're not getting results with the sinus infection and sinus allergy, typically that's a mold issue. And a lot of times what we find is that the person is having a current mold exposure. There are programs for that. They're not standard, obviously. We've actually just over the last year developed a combination. We call it Sinus Complete. And it has the mold component, it has the sinus infection component, it has the sinus allergy component. And that's a program that could be added on to your units. And we'll talk about add-ons at the end as well. So between those, you should be able to really kind of help. It doesn't mean that you're not going to go to your doctor. You're still going to, if they want you on Tamiflu, they're going to, you're still going to do all those things that your naturopath or your doctor want you to take to kind of get through that, so you don't end up in a secondary. If you have a history of pneumonia and you have influenza, I highly recommend just run it. With these, it doesn't hurt. If that's not what you have going on, there's no negative to running that, right? I don't want to say, we never say it, things are diagnostic, but it can point you towards, if influenza is what is really taking down your symptoms, then make sure that you're getting tested for influenza so that you know that you have that, right? So let's go into the big one, the one everybody is dealing with around here. That's COVID. So we, like I had mentioned earlier on when I signed on, we have 3. We have Alpha, we have Delta, and we have Omicron, all in our community. So we've had all kinds of issues going on in Southeast Michigan. So the key program that we found is cold virus test. And I tell people, if you think you've had COVID, if you've had a known exposure, if you've just, if you went to the Peach Bowl and you just want to make sure that you didn't have an exposure, cold virus test is the one to do. I actually had my known father, who's now 80. We had him using it really even preventatively every other day. He's my compliant parent. I love that. And so cold virus chest, that's the key program. What we've been seeing, at this point, I kind of keep it in my mind in bunches of 10s. We're over 100 now. So since COVID had started, we've had easily over 100 individuals report back that they've been utilizing the program. It's been consistent with the cold virus test. I like to call it CVC. The CVC is the key program. We've had 3 doctors report back that they watch the pulse oxes while that program's running and have reported back that it consistently increases, their pulse ox consistently increases while it's running. And as soon as that program's done, it goes down. They have not seen the same changes with other programs like influenza. I've got a chat coming in here. So what is the placement? We'll get to that, Gary. We'll talk about that. Yep. And so it just that tells me that it's important for us to have that on to make sure. I was talking to a doctor friend of mine, and she just says, I told all my patients that if you have COVID or if you're sick with anything, you better have a pulse ox. And if you have pulse ox, you're not my patient anymore, right? I won't go that far, but it is absolutely imperative. We had a nurse very early on in the Metro Detroit area who passed away, and she was just there by herself. And she obviously had very low pulse ox oxygen sats, and yet had no idea. So many times people are saying that their sats can be really low and not even realize that they're not oxygenating. So why do we think this program works? For those of you who are practitioners and kind of have that kind of practitioner mind, we actually unpacked this. My conference for the annual microcurrent conference for the fall of 2020 was, of course, on COVID, right? And so I unpacked the program to really kind of better understand, because I wrote that program, 14 years ago for my daughter's care. What I found is that there's a couple of frequencies that I think were kind of telling. There's a frequency that's in there that has there are frequencies that have dual purpose. And one of the purposes is for chronic inflammation. I'm like, wow, that makes sense because I wrote it for Natasha and she had chronic bronchitis. And so I'm sure I would have put that in there. But it also has a dual purpose of clots. So there's a number of frequency laminates that have it listed for clotting as well. And I'm like, oh, is that why we're seeing it help? So far, that in those folks that have reported back to me, or I've supported through their COVID processes, knock on wood, we've not had anyone report any clots. No clots, no strokes, no long haulers, no adverse reactions, no hospitalizations for people who use it right away. We had one person who waited over a week. I think it was almost 10 days. He's in his 80s. He did end up hospitalized. So get it on fast, and obviously use all your other tools as well. So the other things that people are adding in: fever only when needed. I think I ran it. I don't even think I ran it for myself. I only ran it for the vaccine reaction. Influenza, it's in there already. Where we actually are using that is later on for worsening or to clear. So what we've been telling is use cold virus chest, use it a lot. Add in influenza if you're feeling like you're going down, like it's like you're not keeping ahead of it, like you're not on top of it when the fever starts to rise. And because I think it is because of the secondary kinds of things, right? I think that when people have those illnesses, that strep seems to be a big one. We've had probably about half a dozen users or practitioners who have strong strep histories, and they really struggled with COVID enough that we were supporting them more on a day-to-day basis. And all but one of them had strep added onto their unit already. So they had such a long history of strep that it was something that they had placed as an add-on. That's, you can say, oh, well, 6 is not that many, but of all those people with that history, it's enough for you to kind of go, okay, if I have a strong strep history, I need to keep that in mind. And if you've added that onto your unit, then keep it in mind and add into this mix here. So those are some good ones to kind of consider. So let's talk about the initial phase, how we use it. We'll also go through some setups here. Cold virus chest, key program, get it on right away. If you add in, so say you're not keeping on top of it, the symptoms are getting worse. Your stats are not holding where they need to. Add in influenza, but I still tell people use cold virus chest 3 times as often. So what I would do is CBC, 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 influenza, CBC, CBC, and then I would keep that going. Usually influenza, those secondary kinds of things don't seem to come into play until day 5, through day 7, somewhere in that time frame, which actually kind of makes sense to me in some of my direct patient support, because it seems like people in that beginning seem to do pretty, yeah, I've got it, I have some symptoms, and then all of a sudden things start to really ramp up at that 5 to 7, or they ramp down, right? So we just want to make sure that we're helping people ramp down instead of having them ramp up. So the setup is pretty standard. It's red, yellow to the back of the neck. And then the blue green, we're going to have, if it, for me, it never really went into my lungs. So I would keep it at my chest. But if you are one of those people that it's in the lungs, I would go into the abdomen, right? So upper abdomen, just so that we're really targeting that entire trunk area. Now, one of the things that I actually brought here. So a couple of things that I will say on the setups. I personally prefer, for the neck, I prefer the 2x4s, right? So these are the cherished life electrodes that we carry. The bigger pads tend to stay a little bit better. Somebody asked, is the stress you're referring to number 46, and can someone with a pacemaker use this device? I'm not, Mickey, I'm not talking about, I don't remember where I said stress. And no, I wasn't talking about number 46, but we'll talk about pacemaker well, actually, I just mentioned here, people with pacemakers can use the device. We have a couple of users that are paced. However, you do have to take care that the current doesn't flow through the pacemaker. So that means that the people are limited to setups of neck to chest, so that it's above the level of the heart or below. So they're literally going from the low back to the abdomen. So we have a gal, she's cute as a button, who's a little bit older, and that's what she does. She does neck to arm, neck to upper throat area, or she does the low back area. And that's how you do it. Keep the current low. Intensity, what we found is when you're running these programs, you want to be able to run these programs for a fair amount of time to support you. If you're a sensitive soul like myself, I just start to get to the point where I just feel kind of like it's just too much energy, right? It's kind of, I hit that point when I'm at about 12, 13 hours of treatment. And when you're supporting for something like this, you might be running that. I mean, what else do you have to do but keep yourself hooked up, right? And so just keep yourself hydrated, keep yourself hooked up, and keep that intensity low enough that you can actually that you can tolerate doing it for a long time. For me, that's about the 50 microamp level. So it's pretty low compared to the rest of it. And so magnetic converters versus direct micro. I know a number of you guys have the magnetic converters of some sort. And so, I'm just going to give my personal opinion on this. I love my magnetic converter. It's super, super convenient. I will share with you my very first experience of using the device. And it was, I had a flare of my shingles in my eye. And I thought, okay, this is a good test, because I know what the shingles program does for this was the second bout I'd had. And so when I hooked myself up on the magnetic converter, what I found was that my symptom relief was maybe a quarter to a third as effective as if I actually hooked myself up with the actual sticky pads and the current. And so when it comes to illness, and especially if it's something like if you're out of the woods, right? If you're at day 10, or if your day Omicron seems to be shorter, if you're at day 5 or 6 with Omicron and it's pretty mild, then by all means go with the more convenient magnetic converter. If you're at that point, I had both of them when I had Delta, and I hooked myself up, right? Go through the extra little inconvenience. There's actual ways you can, loop it through. Loop it through a short sleeve shirt. So it's here. Oh, what I was going to say is, on the neck, just get a nice, comfortable hairband for us women and just hook up your hair. Right. And so what's going to happen is, hey, nobody's taking pictures. You shouldn't be doing any selfies when you're sick. Just put that up there. Take off your necklaces, take off any of those kinds of things that are going to be in the way, and just kind of get comfortable and use it in the best way. Using the 2x4s, the larger size, getting my hair up out of the way. I don't usually have a problem with maintaining the electrodes in place. One of the things I will say, and I say this for post-operative as well as illness care, don't feel like you need to take the pads on and off. Now I know some of you are using different pads. The reason that we went with these pads is they're hypoallergenic. Most people don't have issues with them. I know a couple of users, we had a case of them where they were gummier. What I can tell you is they're sea kelp. So are they susceptible to some natural variation? Yes, because it's sea kelp. So what happened was, that case actually was a little bit too gummy. There's ways you can get around that. You can just let them dry out a little bit. You can put them in the refrigerator. The new cases seem to be better. And so keep them in place. I've put these, I have latex sensitivity. I have sensitive skin. I've kept these in place as long as 3 days and not had any skin irritation. So with folks who do tend to have skin irritation that I've seen with any electrodes are the MCAS population. And if that's you, then I recommend the skin allergy, and histamine seems to help kind of take that down. So that's what I'll say about the magnetic converters, because I know there's a number of you on here that have them. So precautions, these are just really Vanessa's statements. Do not underestimate this opponent of COVID. There are a lot of people that go through it and they have mild symptoms. Some people walking around with it that don't even realize that they have it. And there are other people that I have known personally who have left this planet with this bug. I was not cocky. I used all of the tools in my arsenal. Check your pulse ox regularly, maintain connection with your physician. I'm really fortunate. I have an amazing doctor who made herself completely available. We would text updates every single day when I was ill. And so we just kind of maintain, a lot of doctors are doing telehealth now. And so just make sure that you have a doctor's group that is willing. I've not heard of any primary care physicians that are not, that aren't even mainstream kind of docs who are not happy to support their patients through telehealth during these times. Find a good natural doctor that can support you and that can match your goals, right? So I love my doctor because I had COVID toes, which apparently, I want to say as an add-on, did not like microcurrent. So when I tried to put microcurrent on my COVID toes, they were very unhappy. I tried running circulation. I tried running it super low. It just made them more pissed off. But that's where magnetic converter did. Magnetic converter tends to work very effectively for general circulation just because it's a magnet. And so it worked really well and it calmed it down quickly. And I loved that my doctor was like, hey, what about PEMF for your COVID toes? So COVID toes are not as big of a thing right now. They were a bigger issue with Delta. What I'm hearing from my docs on the ground is that the Omicron tends to have much less, and they're not really seeing COVID toes much at all anymore. Supplements, medications, use the entire arsenal. I had a good friend of mine who she has multiple devices, and she is in the older population, the at-risk population, as we like to call ourselves. And I encouraged her, use some, get monoclonal if they're making them available to you, get your ivermectin if you have that available to you. Use whatever tools that you can to make sure that you're giving yourself as good of an opportunity, even if the symptoms are mild, right? And so this opponent can kind of rear its ugly head very quickly, and you just want to make sure that you are prepared and you have all the tools going on. Be realistic about expectations and the role of microcurrent. It's an adjunct or support. It's not a solution or treatment. I am incredibly happy that we can say that we haven't lost anybody using the device, and that people report back that it's incredibly helpful. That's the goal. The device is FDA registered for pain and healing because that's its wheelhouse. It's a great bonus that we have these wellness programs that can help for these roles. We just have to be really honest with people about that. I'm very careful, and this is not just I'm not saying this just as a CYA in case the FDA listens to this. I really mean this. It's just one tool, and use all those other tools that are available out there. So lung compromise, so aftercare. So, I'm really, really happy to hear that we don't have anybody who's been using the device that have long-term lung issues or oxygenation issues or long haulers. I have had some long haulers, clients who've come in to see me as a direct client patient. They are not people who had the devices before, but Dr. Andy actually is the one that came up with this idea, is that if you're past the point of the bug, so say you're 2 weeks out, you're still having issues with not being able to catch your breath or feeling like you just can't get a lung full of air. Asthma has been reported to consistently help ease that increase that pulmonary breath in kind of feeling. And so you want to make sure that the infection's gone though. So if you look in the manual, like under general inflammation program, it'll tell you do not use when there's infections present, and that's because the body uses inflammation as an target, like it says, okay, it's inflamed here, bring in the immune response, bring in the troops. And so it uses inflammation as a guide to where to bring in that immune response. So bringing down inflammation when you really need immune is not going to be helpful. In fact, you can get flares. No, the microsports have been programmed in a way to try to really minimize that risk. And knock on wood, we've never had anybody have a serious issue with this, because I think I program it differently than some of my predecessors. But that said, we want to err on the side of caution, right? So asthma, once the infection is gone, when you feel like you're outside of the woods, and kind of bring that in. Some people have added on, there's a lung support post-virus that has been added to some of the units. That program was really written right at the beginning of COVID. I didn't have anybody really putting it on their units for probably about a year. And so that program is really helpful for if people have histories of COPD or other kind of respiratory compromise, that where there's a scarring and adhesion, it's very helpful for those clients. I think a lot of folks are finding similar things with asthma, as long as it's not that COPD, chronic lung issues. Long haulers, so far in my own clinic, I run cold virus test, just kind of because their systems have never had it, so they've never had that kind of frequency to kind of target those actual coronaviruses. So I run that once on the first visit. Add in lung support. That's been my combination. A lot, I've only had a couple that have come in. They both are clients that have had significant underlying other issues, leaky gut issues, Lyme disease, those kinds of things. So add in obviously all those things to target and help with those. So infection full body, if they're a Lyme, and add in all those things. Obviously long haulers. If you have that fatigue issue, that's where physical stress is nice. There's a program. It's actually both on the pro rehab as well as the home units. On the home units, it's well 3 physical stress. It's sympathetics. It's vagus reboot, the full vagus reboot, and it is adrenal support. And that's actually kind of a winning combination for people when they're coming out and they're feeling like that they have that fatigue. Most of, I don't want to say I still have the fatigue. It really hit me towards the end at that like 7 to 10 day point. When I went back to work, I didn't actually step into doing clients for about 2 weeks. And I still had fatigue here and there. I'd go from feeling normal to then I'd feel tired. And I told myself, I'm going to take a nap every morning. I'm going to take a nap in the afternoon, and I'm going to take care of myself. And I'm going to be realistic about this. And I'm not going to push myself. And then my then office manager quit on my first day back. Which was, I'm like, okay, but thankfully, I don't know, some divine intervention, my energy level came back just like that. And I actually heard that in my, 80-year-old mother as well, when she went through COVID very, very early on. It just seems to kind of kick back in. But the ways that we can help that are, the physical stress for the adrenal support, just so that, if you're feeling like you already probably had some adrenal fatigue going into it. The quiet adrenals, calming down the adrenals, so like an evening version of the program is built into Calm Rest, which is STR6, stress 6, or it's also in the night anti-aging program as well. We're doing pretty good. Okay, so need changes. So I think we're doing pretty good. We're actually going to have time for Q&A. So we don't charge. So if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I really need that lung recovery program, Vanessa, or I have this strong history of strep and I really am struggling, or I just want to be prepared. We don't charge for any changes for add-ons. We ask for $45 for the shipping. That's just to cover the cost of the shipping. Get it to us. Email me the changes first. And that way we have it. I change it in the right into the mode bank, into the actual programming guide. And then as soon as your unit comes in, Allison takes out that unit, plugs it in, we reprogram it. We'll send you out a new programming guide that shows what we've added. And then we drop it back in the box, usually the same business day, unless we just get it too late in the day, but it usually goes back out in that same day. So we can turn it around very, very quickly. We don't change the standard programs. We can't support it if we change the standard programs. And I am here to tell you, mark my words, the minute you take something off, you need it. It's all on there for a reason. Email the changes to me at vanessa@howrt.com. The turnaround is quick. As far as if you're listening to this and you're like, I can't believe my parents don't have a unit. We have lots of folks in their 80s, and I think mid 80s is our oldest client. The units are pretty easy to use. Go through if you're a user, go through your existing practitioner. So if you are somebody who bought it through, your local doctor, Dr. Lynch, or Dr. Rob, then you'll just contact them or have them contact. Most doctors are happy to supply in for other patients. We keep them in stock and we can ship them usually same day. Overnight is available. It can be expensive, but it can be worth it if you're really in kind of dire straits. We will have ordering online available soon. It's actually been about a half a year project because of the tiered system that we have for practitioners based on volume. That'll all be integrated in there. So we're pretty excited for that. You'll watch for emails. We'll send that out. What will also be available on there is, I'm going to haven't posted anything on our HowRT. We do have a HowRT YouTube channel. All of the videos are going to end up living there. Right now, they kind of live on the Facebook page, and so you'll have access to that. I am going to try to get this one on ASAP, so that folks that need the information can get to it quickly, and so that'll actually be available through the portal on the website as well. So here's our basic contact information. Difference, just so you know, you can always call us, even if it's after hours, even if it's on a weekend. If you leave a voicemail on the HowRT phone, that actually ends up getting directed to my email. And so I'll actually get an email that I'm always checking those kinds of things. So if it's a 10 o'clock on a Saturday, shoot me, leave a message. It'll end up getting to me. Shoot me an email. We have two emails. A lot of you guys have probably noticed, and the difference is HowRT is Allison. So what does Allison handle? Allison handles, the shipping. Allison handles the accessory sales, the payments. And so a lot of times people say, well, I know Vanessa, so I'm going to contact her directly. And then, they're like, oh yeah, then you just hand me off to Allison. I'm like, yeah, because Allison's better at that stuff. She just is. Programming, that's my wheelhouse. So that's my support side. So if you know that you need Vanessa, hey, I'm having issues. CBC doesn't seem to be hitting it. Again, remind me what was that program I should be running instead. Shoot me that email to Vanessa at. That's the kind of things I support at. And in the same way, if you contact Allison and it's she knows some basic things, but she'll probably say that sounds like a programming issue. Let's ask Vanessa, kind of thing. So certainly add that. It will be available. I guess I'm going to try to get this posted this afternoon onto the actual YouTube channel, and I'll send out an email that also includes that link for folks so that they can have easy access to that. So with that, are there any questions? I am going to try to keep this to an hour just so that it's nice and clean and buttoned up for people who are watching it afterwards. Yep. Let's see who we got here. So 1 time a day for prevention, how often if exposure? When it really depends on what your situation is. So when we were in the beginning, I had my dad running it every other day, just one time. He was at the time 79, he's 80 now. And it was kind of funny because he never had any exposures in that time, but I didn't realize, I always kind of assume that when I don't hear from people, that their compliance has fallen off. And after about 3 months of doing that, my dad was like, do I need to keep running this mess, or do I need to am I good? He said, I haven't had any exposures. I didn't get COVID, but he said, and I gotta tell you, my lungs feel amazing. So even though he didn't have any issues, it was helpful. And so if exposed, I guess it really depends on if your issues are more, there's no negative to running more, right? And so if that makes you feel more comfortable and safer because you run it 3 times in a row, then run it 3 times in a row. Right. And so if you didn't develop it, then you're not going to have those, you're not, you're just running it and not needing it. And that's safer than not running it enough. Right. So in general, if you watch just so you guys know, in the manual requires that I have some sort of like frequency. 3 times, up to 3 times a day is kind of code for detox level. So, just want to make sure that you're not going to detox, but really if it's saying up to 3 times a day, you can probably run it as much as you want. The illness programs are where more is more. And especially if you are actually actively sick, run as much as you can tolerate. Any program you recommend to run prior to taking morning supplements, or if a person has malabsorption to increase absorption. Well, absorption is all in the GI program. So the GI distress wellness 2 on the home units was to help balance out. Originally, we wrote the history behind that as we originally wrote it for leaky gut clients. We had naturopaths in our space that needed that kind of support. And so it's all about that program. That said, physical stress is a really nice program because it has the vagus reboot. Vagus is so critical in how our body sees inflammation and how it connects the information between the brain and the gut. And that full vagus reboot is in physical stress. Physical stress is a program that I actually really like running through the magnetic converter. And it's mostly because it gives a lot of free bioavailable energy. More so, even enough so that there's some of us, I really can only tolerate about one of these. Those of you who know they come with 2 discs, but it's just too much energy for me. I feel kind of wired, and I have a number of clients that report the same thing. So you can use just one. If you use one, you just plug it into either port. It doesn't, channel 1, channel 2 doesn't matter. It's smart enough to know which one it has a plug in it. So Carol says I use mine every day, and I'm grateful to being healthier. And we're grateful too, Carol. So I love her. So yeah, it's definitely to pull out. This is not the time to have your microsport collecting dust. I had a good friend of mine I just saw a couple weeks ago, and he and his wife got very sick with COVID, and he just said, I was just so sick, I was just so tired, I just didn't have the energy to get up and get my unit. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's terrifying to me. So get it out, dust it out, dust it off, get it going. I know there's not a lot of microsports out there collecting dust, I don't think, right? But if you are one of those people that kind of let it go up on the shelf, a lot of times people feel so much better, right? They use it for whatever issue they've had, and then they feel like they don't really need it day to day. But it's always that time that you leave it somewhere that you need it. I would say, right, Wendy, right? I think Wendy's on here. She just sent me a really fun picture of on her vacation. She was getting a little crazy. Wendy says yes. So yeah, microsport empowering bad judgment everywhere on the physical level, right, Wendy? Yeah, you guys keep trying, you guys keep doing things, we'll keep patching you up. So any other questions before we kind of call it a day? Anybody have any comments? Do they want to unmic? Don't leave home without it. Anybody have any COVID stories that they want to share? Andy, PO4, liver, kidney, lymph support is vital, helps the body deal with the illness. Yes. And Andy, I have to say, is probably for one, she's one of our most robust practitioners in the country. And I always kind of jokingly say, I've said it in front of her, so I can say it here, that she has the kind of most complex caseload I've ever seen anywhere. And she's done an amazing job supporting her clients. She is the one that figured out the asthma. And it's been really helpful. I share regularly with people, Andy. So thank you for taking it to the next level on everything. So absolutely. So yeah, so if there are not any other questions, I'll give it just about half a second. I want to thank everybody. I will answer if anybody has anything else. I want to thank you for joining us today. Maren says the programs were amazing after septic pneumonia and chest tube, thanks to Andy, who we worked it out to a healthy healthy planet. So yeah, it's thank you, Maren. I know Maren has a long time remind about helping animals. Yes, yeah, Linda has a great story of working with her animals animals. I know for me personally, and of course I have access to my whole mode bank, but I had my little, I have a little puppy. You probably heard her scratching there. She's not a puppy anymore, but she looks like one because she's a Cavalier, and she had pancreatitis this last fall. And that's where the magnetic converters are really great for the animals, because they, you can hook them up direct. I know Andy just sent me a cute little picture with her pup last night after they had a vaccine reaction. So yeah, but the magnetic converters are nice for the animals. So thank you to everybody. Andy says, I have a comment and question. Should I unmute? Absolutely, Andy.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. Hi.
Okay. Hi. So I appreciate what you said. All of this, it's really, really great. A refresher for me, and I'm going to do things a little bit differently now. But there's no reverberation, is there? Okay,
No.
That's all right. The influenza, I found that when people called me, and not necessarily with COVID, but over the last few years, just any tough respiratory influenza or influenza-like, or we don't know what we have, there's a bug going around illness. I learned that if they had, after maybe trying CVC and they'd run it and there was no change, I learned to ask early on, do you ache? Do you have chills? And if they said yes, I said influenza first, and then move back to CVC. That made a huge difference. So it's not the fever component as much for me that I ask, because sometimes they're fever, sometimes they're not, but it's the aches and the chills. Yeah. And so I learned to just, and usually they would just run it once. The other day there was someone, I didn't know at the time that RSV is going around our community, hitting it hard. But I got a call from a user, and I said, run CVC. And I was really bummed, because towards the end of the day, when there was not improvement, but they said, but we're not getting worse. I've come to expect more from the microsport. Right? And I said, so what could it be? And I said, well, and I'd forgotten about influenza. So we ran influenza, it helped. And then going back to CVC, it helped so much better. That it just needed that other put in place right before that. So
that's great input, Andy, and it actually makes sense to me. And we have a lot of RSV going around here as well, because you just can't have too many bugs in one community. And so we had and that was actually, thank you for answering that, because I haven't had a lot of RSV feedback per se, but that and in my mind, I would think that the cold virus chest would work, and that's the nice thing about these frequencies, is they tend to be kind of shotgun, like they tend to work, like the staff frequency, knock on wood, still seems to help with MRSA. We just need to run it more often, right? And so that is really interesting information. And so if anybody has any RSV cases, I would kind of keep that in the back of your mind, to kind of clear, and it probably is clearing out all those other kind of gunky things, don't you think?
Yeah, and a lot of times I don't know, and they don't know they haven't gone to the doctor. They just stay home with their unit and run the programs, but that's just one of the questions that I ask.
Absolutely.
So the question I have has to do with lymph, and lymph is a standalone, and also in PO4 is I need to learn more about lymph. I have a greater respect for the lymphatic system, but what we're seeing is again this same situation, and I don't have my notes in front of me. I can't remember if it was after CVC or after a sinus infection, when we were trying to figure out how to help this teenager with his nasty head cold symptoms. He ran lymph, and then just immediately was sneezing throughout, and afterwards just the sneezing and sneezing and sneezing. And I said, oh my gosh, what did this, and it slowed down, and I wasn't sure what to use, and I didn't find out till later. But if they had called me right away, what could we have used to maybe settle that down? Another situation, I got a text the other day where someone has been a user for a couple months. Her family was sick over Christmas. They do have a history of respiratory things. And she said, now I'm starting to get some postnasal drip. I ran a program, then I'm running lymph. And she said years ago when her daughter was, when she was pregnant with her daughter, it was probably 9 years ago. She said, I'm running lymph, and where I had the injections for preterm to stop preterm labor are starting to itch. They're really itching. And so I'm thinking about all the skin layers and lymph, but this is all interesting piece. And I'm curious to know what, can you speak to the lymph part of those programs?
And so I'm glad you actually brought this up, because it reminded me of another little nuance that I've noticed. I started noticing it in my clients who have had COVID. When they come back, I also am a lymphatic therapist, just so that you guys know. I'm a physical therapist. I'm trained in craniosacral and lymphatics. And of course, lymph is going to be involved when we're ill, but there's some interesting things with COVID. So like when, if you work with somebody after they've had influenza, like you notice you get the swollen lymph nodes in the neck and the armpit, the typical stuff. But what I had noticed with lymph and people that had COVID is, and myself, is the lymph of the head seems to be incredibly impaired. And so I don't know why, to the point of where, like, the first time I had a massage, which was probably 3-4 weeks after I had COVID, she started doing some stuff. And I just had to start itching my scalp. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's right. Every single client I've had who's had COVID has this tight lymph in the head. So there's definitely a component. It is probably, it probably is something that we probably should add into the standards after PO3. The difference between lymph and PO4 and the full lymph program is a full lymph program, right? I think it's 50 minutes of lymphatics. It addresses some adhesions and some different fibrosis that might occur within the lymphatic system, the lymph nodes, to actually get things really cleared. As far as your client who had the drainage, what I would guess is that he probably has a pretty significant history of some sinus issues, and that we probably need to address, like with either sinus allergy program, sinus infection, because there's probably some bugs in there as well. And there might even be a mold kind of component where he might be appropriate for that sinus complete, or add in the mold full body program. And so, yeah, so obviously lymphatics, keeping lymphatics healthy. I haven't seen where people really need to run lymph like during their actual illness, but I think you have and seen some value there. So I don't discount that it might not be beneficial to people. And keeping that lymphatics moving and keeping it healthy is really critical whenever you're ill. And so yeah, so it's not going to replace a manual lymphatic drainage, session, because that's mechanical and we go through. I have to tell you that when we did a lot of lymph in my practice, a lot of people said that session, that full lymph program that's on there is the equivalent of about an hour lymph session. And then also, yeah, I'll get to that question really quick, Harold. And then as far as the difference between that and the detox support is liver support, kidney support, lymphatics, and a brief immune support, enough that it's not like going to be too much for somebody who has an autoimmune disorder, but just to help the body clear any gunk that it might have moved. So it's about moving those things out. Harold asked, what about loss of taste and smell with COVID? I haven't had anyone of my clients report back that they have that. I personally had, I had a heightened sense of taste and smell, which was kind of weird. But I would love to have some feedback. I personally think that just neuroatrophy should bring that back, because I think that it is enough, even though it's a cranial nerve. I think that it is nerve-like enough to those cranial nerves that are very nerve-like tend to respond to just the straight nerve program. So I would think personally that just the neuroatrophy should help with that. I would love it if somebody would try it. And I mean, it's to the point where if I see people in my community, my hairdresser the other day, had to cancel in December because they had COVID in their household, and she had it, and she said, yeah, my sense of taste and smell are still not better. I'm like, and you have not come in for me to try to figure this out, right? And so I would actually love that if somebody came in. Marin's asked, post illness to move out prescribed drugs, IV antibiotics, I use lymph and liver detox, fast recovery. Absolutely, right? That's it. That's one of the advantages of having this in our homes, right? Is that we have this arsenal in this toolbox. For 2022, I definitely am going to be, we've got this website launching, and we're going to have more of a platform for these videos. So we'll be doing a lot more. I've had the intention of setting an in-person course here that we could actually then just stream the in-person courses from our facility here, but we've just had too many outbreaks for that to even be reasonable. But we'll kind of keep that going. So with that, I think I'm going to sign off. Obviously, if anybody has any questions, need any support, we're here. Certainly reach out to me. Like I said, if you know somebody who really could use this information, I will try to get this onto the Howard YouTube channel today. There will be an email that will go out. I'll do another email blast with that link. So if you want to share it with somebody that you know, if you want to rewatch it. Thank you, everybody for joining and sticking with us this whole time. You're very welcome, Andy, and thank you for joining and adding it. I was hoping that you would. And so everybody stay healthy. Be smart. Like I said, don't underestimate this bug. But know that we don't have to sit in fear without any tools. We do have a tool. If you're one of those people that had your microsport sitting up on that shelf, dust that baby off. This is not the time to not be using it. Get yourself healthy, be well, sleep well. Sleep is so essential to the immune response. So thank you very much. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for all of you guys, and we're happy and we feel truly blessed to be able to support you all. Have a great day. Have a great Saturday, guys.